America was stunned as Representative Jasmine Crockett took the floor and boldly declared that former President Donald Trump was far more dangerous to women and children than any transgender person could ever be. The chamber went silent as Crockett, in her trademark style, unleashed a powerful rebuttal to the GOP's ongoing campaign to vilify the transgender community, claiming that it was Trump and his supporters who had created policies that caused real harm to women and children. What followed was a searing indictment of the Republican Party, its leader, and its policies, a message that would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. Jasmine Crockett's speech wasn't just a political commentary, it was an impassioned defense of the truth, a call to action for Americans to wake up and see what was truly going on in the political world. She didn't back down, and her words left no room for doubt. The biggest threat to women and children wasn't transgender people, but a political system that perpetuated inequality and undermined their well-being. Crockett's clarity and courage in speaking these words stunned her audience, and left viewers across the country rethinking the way they viewed the political landscape. As she began speaking, it was clear this was not going to be your typical congressional statement. There was no attempt to soften the message, no mincing words. This was a direct challenge to those who would dare to undermine the rights of marginalized communities for political gain. She didn't hesitate to call out the hypocrisy that had defined the actions of the Republican Party, pointing out that their so-called concern for women and children was not just misguided, but destructive. The basis of Crockett's argument rested on one central truth, that for years, the GOP had used the transgender community as a scapegoat, all the while enacting policies that actively harmed the very women and children they claimed to protect. She pointed to the repeated attempts by Republican lawmakers to restrict the rights of transgender individuals, using them as a distraction from the real issues at hand, the policies that were actually hurting women, children, and marginalized communities across the nation. Crockett wasted no time in exposing the lie behind the GOP's political theater. She called it exactly what it was, an intentional campaign of misdirection, designed to deflect attention from the real issues plaguing the country. The first part of her argument focused on the very real consequences of the Trump administration's policies for women. She pointed to the repeated efforts to cut funding for women's health services. Planned Parenthood, which provides essential healthcare services to millions of women, was one of the most obvious targets of the Republican assault on women's rights. Funding for family planning, reproductive health, and cancer screenings had been slashed, leaving many women in underserved communities without access to the care they needed. When the Republican Party says it's protecting women, Crockett declared, they're lying. They're not protecting women. They're actively making it harder for women to get the care they need. This wasn't just a matter of cuts to healthcare funding, it was about the deliberate undermining of women's autonomy over their own bodies, by restricting access to contraception, abortion services, and essential health screenings. The GOP had created a landscape where women's health and well-being were secondary to political agendas and corporate interests. Crockett was not about to let them hide behind their hollow rhetoric any longer. But it wasn't just healthcare that Crockett targeted. She also highlighted the harm done to survivors of domestic violence under Trump's policies. Funding for shelters, legal support, and counseling services for women escaping abusive relationships had been slashed, leaving many women with nowhere to turn. How can you claim to protect women when you're cutting off their safety nets? Crockett asked. How can you call yourselves protectors when you're making it harder for women to escape abusive situations? The silence from the Republican side of the chamber spoke volumes. There were no rebuttals, no defenses of these policies, just the uncomfortable truth that couldn't be ignored. As she continued, Crockett turned her focus to the most vulnerable members of society, children. She didn't hesitate to remind the nation of the damage done by the Trump administration's policies toward children. One of the most horrifying aspects of Trump's presidency was the cruel practice of family separations at the southern border. The images of children in cages, crying out for their parents, were seared into the national consciousness. Crockett didn't mince words when she called out the inhumanity of the policy, asking, was this really about protecting children? Or was it about punishing families seeking refuge, with no regard for the trauma you were inflicting on innocent children? Crockett went further, pointing out that Trump's tax cuts for the rich and the corporations had directly harmed children by depriving them of essential public services like education, healthcare, and food assistance. She reminded everyone that the expansion of the child tax credit, one of the few policies that had helped lift millions of children out of poverty, was not extended under Trump. You can't claim to care about children's futures when you're slashing funding for the programs that help them survive, she said. At this point, Crockett pivoted to one of the most important moments in her speech. She took direct aim at the GOP's obsession with attacking the transgender community. Crockett made it crystal clear that this wasn't about protecting women or children. It was about a manufactured crisis designed to distract from the real issues. "You want to talk about danger?" she said. "The real danger isn't a transgender person living their truth. The real danger is a man who spent his presidency undermining women's rights, mocking women's bodies, and inflicting harm on the most vulnerable people in our society, women and children." Her words stung because they were undeniably true. Trump's rhetoric had made it acceptable to demean and belittle women, to trivialize their pain, and to treat their issues as political talking points. His policies had stripped away protections for survivors of violence, denied healthcare to those in need, and attacked programs that had been designed to protect women and children from poverty, abuse, and neglect. Crockett was right to point out that, in comparison, the threats posed by transgender people, who have long been the target of baseless fearmongering, paled in comparison to the harm caused by the Republican Party's policies. She turned the tables on the GOP by pointing out that, despite their obsession with transgender people, trans individuals are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. The rates of violence, harassment, and discrimination faced by transgender people, particularly transgender women of color, are appalling. Crockett didn't just present this as a statistical fact, she connected it to the larger pattern of harmful GOP policies. She asked, "If you really cared about women and children, wouldn't you be focused on the real dangers, the ones that are backed by actual violence, not imaginary threats?" At this point, Crockett had made her case clear. The Republican Party wasn't interested in protecting women or children. They were more interested in using marginalized communities, like transgender people, as political pawns to stir up fear and divide the country. But Crockett wasn't finished. She wasn't just calling out the hypocrisy of the GOP. She was also challenging Americans to wake up to the reality of the situation. She warned that the media and politicians had spent too much time focusing on distractions, the so-called threat of trans people, while ignoring the real issues that were hurting women and children. Crockett's speech was a call to action. It was a demand for the American public to stop accepting the narratives being fed to them and start demanding real change. She encouraged viewers to think critically about the policies that actually affect their lives. "Look at the facts," she said. "Look at the policies. Look at the harm that's been done. And ask yourself, who is really looking out for women and children?" The media response was immediate. Pundits and commentators scrambled to analyze Crockett's words. But the message had already been received. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. She had made it clear that the GOP's manufactured culture wars were nothing more than a distraction from the policies that were truly harming people. In the aftermath of Crockett's speech, the political landscape began to shift. Conversation started to center on the real issues, the issues that had been buried under layers of political rhetoric and fearmongering. People began to realize that the danger to women and children wasn't coming from trans individuals, but from a political system that had lost sight of what truly mattered. Crockett's words didn't just resonate in the halls of Congress, they resonated with everyday people. They understood that the fight for women's rights, children's rights, and the rights of marginalized communities was not a battle against one group of people. It was a battle against the systems of power that perpetuated inequality, exploitation, and harm. If you believe that Representative Jasmine Crockett was right to call out the real dangers to women and children, then don't let her message fade away. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. Let's make sure the truth is heard, that the voices of those fighting for justice are amplified, and that we never stop demanding accountability from those in power.